Carter Vance, the billionaire CEO of Vance Enterprises, kept a petite, beautiful mistress on the outside named Chloe Davis. She was supposedly pregnant, and he spent every day by her side, coaxing her. But he had no idea that at the exact moment he was spoon-feeding premium caviar to that woman, his legal wife, Evelyn Hayes, had quietly listed their $15 million Bel Air mansion with a real estate broker. By the time he returned to that house, the locks had been changed, the luggage was gone, and his wife and son had vanished completely, as if they had never existed. His assistant Thomas called him, his voice trembling. "Mr. Vance, 3 days ago, your wife sold the mansion and took the young master abroad. Right now, you don't even have a place to live." Carter slumped to the floor. Only then did he realize that the unlimited supplementary Centurion card in his wallet had been completely maxed out by Evelyn 3 days prior. Earlier that day, Carter had blown on the last bite of caviar and brought it to Chloe's lips. Chloe acted spoiled, turning her face away, whining that she truly could not eat another bite and that the baby was full too. Carter placed a hand on her stomach, his voice shifting into an entirely different, gentle tone. He coaxed her to be good and take just one more bite for their son. Chloe pouted, swallowed the caviar, and leaned into Carter's embrace. She pointed out that he had been with her for 3 hours today and asked if his wife would be angry if he went home late. Carter's face darkened. He scoffed, asking what she had to be angry about. He provided the house, the cars, and the money. If she dared to say a single word of complaint, he would kick her out onto the streets. The corners of Chloe's mouth twitched upward before she quickly pulled them down, replacing her expression with a pitiful one. She begged Carter not to speak about his wife that way, saying it must be hard for her to be home alone with the young boy. Carter let out a cold laugh, stating that he had not even settled the score with her for raising a child of unknown origins. He checked his Rolex, stood up, and told Chloe to get some good rest. He promised to visit her again the next day. Chloe nodded obediently and walked him to the door. The moment the door clicked shut, the innocent look on Chloe's face vanished completely. She pulled out a burner phone, opened a text thread with an unsaved number, and typed a single message. He left. The person on the other end replied immediately with one word: "Good." Carter sat in the back of his limited edition Maybach, rubbing his temples. His veteran driver, Arthur, looked at him through the rearview mirror and cautiously asked if they were heading back to the Bel Air estate. Carter gave a dismissive hum of agreement. Arthur started the engine. Carter leaned against the leather seat and closed his eyes to rest, his mind calculating which private clinic in Beverly Hills he should take Chloe to for her ultrasound the next day. He was completely oblivious to the fact that Arthur's hands were slightly shaking on the steering wheel. After an hour of driving, they finally arrived at the Bel Air estate. Carter stepped out of the car and walked along the pebble-paved driveway to the front door. He pulled out his keys, inserted them into the lock, and twisted. The door did not budge. Frowning, he applied more force and twisted again. It still would not open. Carter cursed under his breath. He banged on the door twice, shouting for Evelyn to open it. When no one answered, he yelled for his 4-year-old son Leo to open the door for his dad. Still, there was nothing. Anger flared in Carter's chest. He pulled out his phone and dialed Evelyn's number. A cold, automated voice informed him that the subscriber's phone was powered off. Refusing to believe it, he called Leo's smartwatch. That was turned off too. Carter's face turned grim. Just as he was about to pound on the door again, Mrs. Miller, the neighbor from the adjacent property, walked by carrying a bag of groceries. She gave him a strange look. She asked why he was still here. Carter turned to her, demanding to know what she meant by that, asserting that this was his house. Mrs. Miller looked startled. She pointed out that his family had already moved out. A few days ago, she saw a real estate agent bringing people over for viewings, saying the owner had listed it for a quick sale at a bargain price. A ringing noise echoed in Carter's ears. He demanded to know who sold it. Mrs. Miller, taken aback by his fierce expression, told him it was his wife, Evelyn. She had seen Evelyn sign the listing agreement with her own eyes. Carter's hand shook around his phone. He asked when exactly this happened. Mrs. Miller thought for a moment and said it was 3 days ago. That day, Evelyn had walked out holding the young boy's hand, pulling 2 large suitcases. When Mrs. Miller asked in passing, Evelyn had mentioned they were going on an international vacation. Carter stood frozen, feeling as if a bucket of ice water had been dumped over his head. Seeing his pale face, Mrs. Miller did not say anything else and quickly hurried away with her groceries. Carter stood before the door he could no longer open. The California sun was blindingly bright, but he felt freezing cold. He dialed his executive assistant, Thomas. It rang 5 or 6 times before Thomas finally picked up. Carter barked an order to find out exactly where Evelyn was. There was a few seconds of dead silence on the other end. Carter roared at him to speak. Thomas's voice sounded as if he had just been crying. He stammered that he was just about to report this to him. 3 days ago, Evelyn had hired an agency to sell the Bel Air mansion for $15 million in cash, and the funds had already cleared. Carter's eyes widened. He yelled that it was impossible because he held the deed. Thomas took a deep breath and reminded his boss that, to avoid certain property taxes back in the day, the mansion had been placed entirely under Evelyn's name. Carter's heart pounded violently. He demanded to know where his son Leo was. Thomas's voice grew even quieter, explaining that Evelyn had taken the boy on an international flight 3 days ago, destination Zurich, Switzerland. Carter nearly dropped his phone. He demanded to know how she bought the tickets to Switzerland when he had frozen all her credit cards. Thomas sounded breathless as he explained that Evelyn did not use Carter's cards. She used her own account. The founder's shares of a Silicon Valley tech startup registered under her name were liquidated 3 days ago. Right now, Evelyn had more liquid cash in her accounts than Carter did. Carter's vision darkened. He had to grip the doorframe to stay standing. He asked how that was possible, claiming he had investigated that company, and she had nothing. Thomas explained that the majority shareholder of that tech company had always been Evelyn's late mother. Before passing away, her mother left a trust stipulating that the shares would automatically vest and transfer to Evelyn on her 30th birthday. 3 days ago, Evelyn turned 30. Carter felt as if his bones had been removed. He slid down the doorframe and collapsed onto the ground. He remembered now. 3 days ago, while he was accompanying Chloe for her 4D ultrasound, his phone rang 7 or 8 times. It was Evelyn. Finding it annoying, he had simply turned his phone off. Carter opened his mouth, his voice as rough as sandpaper, and asked about his unlimited supplementary black card. Thomas's voice was completely drained of energy. He revealed that 3 days ago, at the airport duty-free luxury boutique, Evelyn swiped the supplementary card to buy a $500,000 Patek Philippe watch. When the bank called Carter to authorize the massive charge, his phone was off. Based on his previous blanket authorizations, the bank pushed it through. Currently, the available balance on Carter's primary account was less than $8,000. Carter sprang to his feet, raising his phone to smash it against the ground. He stopped midair because he saw Mr. Jenkins, the homeowners association manager for the Bel Air community, walking toward him. Mr. Jenkins approached with a professional smile, holding a manila envelope. He greeted Carter, saying it was convenient to run into him. The new owner of the mansion had finalized the title transfer that afternoon and requested that Carter remove his personal belongings from the garage within 2 hours. The new owner also intended to revoke his access to the property's 2 guest parking spots. Carter stared at him, asking who the new owner was. Mr. Jenkins handed him the envelope, stating that it was his wife, Evelyn Hayes. 3 days ago, she sold the house to an LLC in which she held sole managing rights. The transaction was finalized this afternoon. Legally, Carter no longer had any claim to the property. Carter took the envelope. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely open it. Inside was a pristine copy of the new property deed. Under the owner column, it listed a corporate entity. Under the managing member column, 3 bold words stood out: Evelyn Hayes. Carter stared at that name. In his mind, he saw the image of Evelyn greeting him at the door every time he came home over the past 3 years. She was always submissive, always enduring, quietly asking if he was hungry or wanted dinner. He had genuinely believed that this woman could not survive without him. He had thought all her docility was because she did not dare to leave. He had thought wrong. Carter suddenly burst into laughter. He laughed and laughed until the sound morphed into choked, hoarse sobs. He slumped in front of the door he could no longer enter. His phone chimed. It was an iMessage voice note from Chloe, acting sweet, asking him to buy her some croissants from the downtown French bakery on his way over tomorrow morning. Carter stared at the voice note, his thumb hovering over the screen, unable to press it. The security camera above the porch rotated slightly, capturing his pathetic state. 10,000 miles away, at Zurich Airport in Switzerland, a woman wearing a camel trench coat held the hand of a 4-year-old boy as they walked out of the arrivals hall. The boy looked up and asked if they were never going back. The woman bent down, adjusted his scarf, and smiled. She told him of course they would go back. Once she finished handling some business over there, they would return in absolute glory. Standing back up, she took out her phone. She looked at the notification on her screen, confirming the deposit of the $15 million house sale and the $500,000 watch transaction. A slow smile spread across her lips. Evelyn put the phone in her pocket, took Leo's hand, and strode confidently into the crisp autumn sunlight of Zurich. 8,000 miles away, Carter was still sitting in front of the gate of the mansion that no longer belonged to him. The sky above was gloomy and suffocating. Inside the envelope next to him, slipped behind the property deed, was a thin piece of paper. Printed at the top were the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." At the bottom of the page, Evelyn's signature was neat, decisive, and even carried a hint of vindictive sharpness. The date on the document was 3 days ago, the exact afternoon he had turned off his phone to attend Chloe's ultrasound. Carter clutched the divorce papers tightly, the sharp edges of the paper digging painfully into his palm. He finally understood something. That woman had never been waiting for him to come home for dinner. She had simply been waiting for the moment he completely let go. Carter sat on the ground for 2 full hours. Mr. Jenkins came by twice to urge him, stating that the new owner's deep cleaning crew was about to arrive and requesting that he leave immediately. Carter stood up, his knees popping, his legs so numb he could barely stand. He folded the divorce papers, shoved them into his pocket, took one last look at the mansion he had lived in for 3 years, and turned toward the garage. His Maybach was still parked there. The new owner had not touched his car. But the red Porsche that used to be parked next to it was gone. That was Evelyn's car. Carter got into the driver's seat of his Maybach and sat there in a daze for a long time. He suddenly remembered that the red Porsche was bought the year Evelyn married him. She paid the down payment herself. At the time, he had found it ridiculous, mocking a married woman for insisting on buying her own car. Evelyn had just smiled and said spending her own money gave her peace of mind. Back then, he thought she was just being bizarre and stubborn. Thinking about the true meaning behind her words now sent a chill down Carter's spine. He drove out of Bel Air, having no idea where to go. He had no desire to see Chloe right now, and his mind was too chaotic to go to the office. Eventually, he drove to his parents' estate in Beverly Hills. His father, Richard Vance, and his mother, Margaret Vance, lived there. Carter walked in. Margaret was arranging flowers. Seeing him home at this hour, she looked slightly surprised and asked why he was back so early, inquiring about Evelyn and Leo. Carter took off his suit jacket, threw it on the sofa, and said they were gone. Margaret's hand, holding the floral scissors, froze. She asked what he meant by gone. Carter collapsed onto the sofa, tilting his head back to look at the ceiling. He explained that Evelyn sold the mansion, took Leo abroad, and left divorce papers for him to sign. Margaret set the scissors down and walked over to sit opposite him. She sighed deeply. She reminded him how many times she had warned him that Evelyn was not someone to trifle with. She reminded him of the status Evelyn's late mother held in the corporate world. Even though her mother was gone, the network of the Hayes family remained. She asked if he really thought Evelyn would just forget his coldness over the years. Carter sat up abruptly, demanding to know what his mother meant. He asked if she knew Evelyn was going to leave. Margaret sighed again, saying she did not know Evelyn would go to this extreme, but she knew Evelyn would leave eventually. She asked Carter if he thought Evelyn did not know about the mistress, Chloe, he kept on the outside. She asked if he thought Evelyn did not realize that they hadn't shared a bed in 3 years. When Evelyn was pregnant with Leo, Carter never attended a single prenatal appointment. When she was in labor, he was out hosting a birthday party for Chloe. Evelyn never spoke of these things, but she recorded every single debt in her heart. Carter's face went pale. He remembered those events, of course, but he had always felt it did not matter. Evelyn had a mild temper and never raised her voice. He thought she could accept anything. He thought she would endure it for a lifetime. Margaret looked at her son's expression and shook her head. She told him to stop putting on a pitiful face and instructed him to go check the drawers in his old study upstairs. She said everything Evelyn left for him was in there. Margaret had seen it a few days ago while cleaning the room. She told him that if he had bothered to open even one of them, he would not have been caught so off guard today. Carter sprang up and sprinted upstairs. His old study was at the end of the second-floor hallway. Pushing the door open, he saw the desk and cabinets had been wiped completely clean. All documents were stacked neatly. He opened the third drawer on the left. Inside sat 3 brown leather-bound journals. Carter picked up the top journal and opened it. The first page was dated the 2nd month after their wedding. There was only one line. Tonight, he didn't come home again. I ate alone and had some stomach pains. I wonder if it's from the injection at the clinic yesterday. The doctor told me to rest in bed for 3 days. I didn't tell him. Even if I did, he wouldn't care. Carter turned a few pages. Page 3. Went for a prenatal checkup today. The doctor asked where my family was. I said my husband was on a business trip. I had 5 vials of blood drawn alone. On the way back, I got motion sickness and threw up in the Uber. The driver demanded a $200 cleaning fee. I texted him, and he transferred the money without even asking why I needed to pay a cleaning fee. Page 5. Leo knows how to say dad now. I recorded a video and sent it to him. He replied with 1 letter. Yes. I stared at that K for half an hour, then deleted the video. Page 15. Woke up at midnight with a 102-degree fever. Called him, and he picked up. I heard a woman laughing in the background. He said he was entertaining clients, and told me to call the family doctor. I hung up and took Tylenol myself. In the morning, the fever broke and my heart turned cold. Page 23. He caught me looking through his phone. He told me, Evelyn, you'd better know your place. I provide you with houses, cars, and money. Don't push your luck. I didn't say anything. I just wondered what he meant by provide. Does he mean the passenger seat of his car that no one is allowed to sit in, or the slippers in the house that always only have 1 pair? Page 40. He came home drunk today and hugged me, calling me Chloe. I told him he had the wrong person. He slapped me and asked how I dared to talk back. The slap wasn't heavy, but I couldn't sleep. In the middle of the night, I took out the supplementary black card he left under my pillow. I didn't spend a dime. I just stared at it. I stared at it all night. Carter flipped to the very last page. The handwriting here was much messier, written in a rush. The final entry read, "Today is Leo's 4th birthday," he called. I thought he was wishing Leo a happy birthday. Instead, he told me Chloe is pregnant and told me to be smart and move out on my own. I said, okay. He probably thinks I'm playing hard to get. He doesn't know I've already thought this through perfectly. On my 30th birthday, I will take Leo and leave. Houses, cars, money. I will take them myself. I don't need him to kick me out. The date was 2 months ago. Carter closed the journal, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold it. He collapsed onto the floor of the study, leaning against the bookshelf, his mind playing the words from the journal on an endless loop. Drawing 5 vials of blood alone, throwing up in the Uber. The 102-degree fever, hugging her while calling out Chloe's name. The slap. He reached up and touched his own face. That slap had landed on her face. He had been so drunk he didn't remember. But he remembered waking up the next morning and noticing one side of Evelyn's face was red. When he asked what happened, she said she had slept on it wrong, and he had believed her. Carter looked down at the journal in his hands. On the cover was a small brown stain, like the mark left by a dried tear. He hugged the journal to his chest, pressed his forehead to his knees, and his shoulders shook violently. Downstairs, Margaret heard a heavy thud from upstairs, like something dropping to the floor. She did not go up. She picked up her phone and sent Evelyn a message. I know about your trip abroad. Take care. 10 minutes later, a reply came through. Thank you, Mom. Take care of your health. Margaret stared at those 2 words. Mom. For 3 years, Evelyn had called her that with absolute sincerity. She thought of her sinful son and all his wrongdoings over the years. She knew she could not stop this. So she had secretly helped Evelyn slip all of Leo's childhood photo albums into her suitcase before she left. She hadn't said a word at the time. Evelyn had hugged her and said thank you. That hug had been warm. Margaret still remembered it. The sound of Carter's broken sobs echoed faintly from upstairs. Margaret closed her eyes and placed her phone face down on the table. Serves him right, she thought, before letting out a long sigh. He was her biological son, yet she could not bring herself to offer a single word of comfort. In the study, Carter stacked the 3 journals, his knuckles turning white as he gripped their edges. His phone chimed. It was another voice note from Chloe. He pressed play on speaker. Her sweet, whiny voice echoed in the empty room, asking if he could come over because her stomach was hurting. Carter stared at the phone. He suddenly remembered a line from the journal. Called him, and he picked up. I heard a woman laughing in the background. He recognized that laugh now. It was Chloe. He placed his phone face down on the floor, neither replying nor answering. He opened the journal again and flipped back to the last page to look closer. Beneath that messy paragraph of text, there was one tiny line he had missed earlier. The tiny text read, "Carter, I waited 3 years for you to turn around. The day you finally do, I will throw these 3 diaries right in your face and tell you that Leo does not carry the Vance bloodline. Guess whose son he is?" Carter's eyes widened in horror. He furiously flipped back through the pages, reading every word about the prenatal checkups, the days she went alone, the afternoon Leo first called him dad, and the afternoon he replied with a single K. Leo's little face flashed in his mind. He realized he had never truly looked closely at Leo's eyes. He had always assumed the boy looked somewhat like him, but trying to picture it now, he realized the resemblance was just a subconscious lie he told himself. Carter sprang to his feet. His phone fell to the floor, shattering the screen. He stared at that tiny line of text for 5 whole minutes, his mind completely blank. Not his son. That woman had raised a child that wasn't his, living right under his nose for 4 years. He had paid child support every month and bought birthday gifts. Every holiday, when his father demanded a family photo, Carter had stood off to the side with an impatient look on his face. He had assumed it was his own flesh and blood. Carter slowly sank to his knees. He picked up his shattered phone and called his assistant, Thomas. When the call connected, Carter's voice was as raspy as if he had survived a severe illness. He ordered Thomas to investigate something for him. Thomas asked what it was. Carter took a deep breath and demanded the birth records for Leo, every hospital, every file, to find out who the biological father was. There was a 3-second silence on the line. Thomas asked if Carter was absolutely sure he wanted to look into this, warning him that the truth might not be good for him. Carter roared, telling him to just do it. Thomas sighed. He confessed there was something he hadn't dared to tell him. Before leaving, Evelyn had sent Thomas a message, saying if Carter ever wanted to investigate the young master's parentage, he should give him a specific document. It was a DNA paternity test report. The test was conducted 7 days after the boy was born, using samples from Leo and Carter. The result excluded any biological relationship. The shattered phone slipped from Carter's hand, crashing onto the marble floor. The screen went completely black. He slid down the bookcase and collapsed onto the floor. The overhead light flickered, making him dizzy. It turned out she had kept everything. She had prepared for everything. For 3 years, the obedient woman waiting at the door for him every day had been silently counting down. She wasn't waiting for him to come home. She was waiting for the day she would never need him to come home again. Carter woke up when it was already morning. He was shivering. The AC in the study had shut off, and the window was open, letting in the biting autumn wind. He sat up, his back as stiff as a board. His shattered phone wouldn't turn on. He found the landline on the desk and called Thomas. Thomas answered quickly, sounding relieved that Carter had finally called. He stated there was a major issue at the company. Carter rubbed his temples, asking what the issue was. Thomas explained that the board of directors had called an emergency meeting for 9:00 a.m., and all directors were required to attend, including Evelyn. Carter's hand froze. He asked how Evelyn could attend a board meeting from Switzerland. Thomas sounded uncomfortable, explaining that she had arranged to join via video conference. With only 40 minutes until the meeting, Thomas urged Carter to hurry. Carter stood up, stretched, and said he was on his way. He drove 40 minutes to the Vance Enterprises corporate tower in downtown Los Angeles. The receptionist looked at him strangely, opening her mouth to speak but stopping herself. Carter ignored her and walked straight to the elevator. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the receptionist making a hushed phone call, whispering, "He's here." Carter frowned as he reached the executive floor. The hallway was quiet, and the boardroom doors were closed. He pushed them open and walked in. 6 or 7 people were already seated, all senior directors of Vance Enterprises, older men who were usually incredibly deferential to him. Today, as he walked in, no one greeted him. Carter walked to his seat at the head of the table and demanded to know what the meeting was about, noting he hadn't received prior notice. Director Cole, seated next to the chairman's spot, cleared his throat and said the meeting was to inform him of 2 major developments. Director Cole tapped a tablet on the table. The massive projector screen at the front of the room lit up, displaying a video conference window. On the screen sat Evelyn in a brightly lit, modern office. The background featured massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped mountains of Zurich. She wore a sleek gray turtleneck, her hair pulled back into a pristine bun, her makeup light and her complexion glowing. Next to her sat a middle-aged man in a sharp suit and gold-rimmed glasses, with a stack of documents beside him. Carter stared at Evelyn on the screen for 3 seconds, suddenly feeling that she was a complete stranger. He had looked at that face for 3 years, but he had never seen the sharp, confident light in her eyes when she was at home. Evelyn smiled at the camera and greeted the directors. The directors responded warmly, their enthusiasm causing Carter's frown to deepen. Director Cole spoke up, calling her CEO Hayes and suggesting they begin. Carter snapped his head toward Director Cole, demanding to know what he just called her. Startled but maintaining his composure, Director Cole explained that 3 days ago, Evelyn had officially assumed ownership of 37.5% of Vance Enterprises shares, making her the company's largest shareholder. According to corporate bylaws, the largest shareholder had the right to nominate the executive CEO and participate in daily management decisions. Therefore, they were now addressing her as CEO Hayes. Carter felt as if he had been nailed to his chair. He shouted that the company was founded by his father, and the shares were held by his family. How could she possibly have 37.5%? Director Cole interrupted him, explaining that the shares came from Carter's mother, Margaret Vance. 3 days ago, Margaret had legally transferred all her shares to Evelyn for zero monetary compensation. The legal paperwork had already cleared, and Carter could review it whenever he wished. Carter's mind exploded. His mother had given her shares to Evelyn? He suddenly recalled Margaret's nonchalant tone the previous day, telling him to check his study drawers. She had spoken so casually because she knew any discovery he made would be useless. Carter stared at Evelyn's relaxed face on the screen, the blood rushing to his head. He accused her of marrying into the Vance family just to steal his mother's shares, asking what else she was planning to do. Evelyn offered a faint smile, entirely different from the ones he was used to. She stated that his mother transferred the shares voluntarily, fairly, and legally. She invited him to consult an attorney if he doubted it. Evelyn continued, stating that she called the board meeting for 2 reasons. First, as the controlling shareholder, she was officially proposing a special shareholders meeting to restructure the executive management board. Second, she paused, picking up a folder and flipping a page. Second, citing Article 14, Section 3 of the corporate bylaws, the controlling shareholder held the right to propose the immediate termination of the current CEO under special circumstances. She stated that Carter Vance had committed gross mismanagement and severe personal misconduct that damaged the company's reputation. The supporting documents had already been emailed to every director. Carter slammed his hand onto the table, the loud crack echoing in the room. He yelled at her to stop crossing the line, boasting that he had worked at the company for 10 years, and she couldn't just fire him on a whim. Evelyn ignored him, calmly telling the directors to open the email attachments. A chorus of notification chimes filled the boardroom. The directors looked down at their devices, their expressions shifting dramatically. Director Cole read the first page and shot Carter a look that clearly communicated he thought Carter was utterly useless. Carter lunged over and snatched Director Cole's iPad. The screen displayed a photo of Carter and Chloe embracing in the lobby of a luxury hotel. The timestamp was 3 months ago. Beneath the photo was a copy of the company's corporate hospitality expense report from the exact same date. The amount was $28,600. Embezzling corporate funds to take his mistress to a hotel, billed under the sales department's hospitality budget. Carter's blood ran cold. He used to think this was no big deal. The company was his, so spending his own money and expensing it was fine. No one would dare question him. But he had forgotten that Evelyn was now sitting in the controlling shareholder's seat. Evelyn's voice echoed calmly from the speakers. She mentioned she also had 3 surveillance videos but didn't want to waste the board's time playing them. The main point was that during his tenure, Carter had utilized corporate resources for lavish personal expenses, preliminarily estimated at over $2 million. According to corporate bylaws, he was required to provide full restitution. Carter stared daggers at Evelyn on the screen, accusing her of doing all this just for revenge. Evelyn looked back at him, her expression completely indifferent. She stated she was not seeking revenge. She was simply exercising her legal rights as the largest shareholder. The money he had squandered over the years was technically part of the equity his mother transferred to her, so demanding it back was only natural. She looked down at the dossier and continued, listing his professional failures, causing the company's net profit to drop by 42% over 3 years, triggering a 60% turnover rate among senior executives, damaging the brand's reputation with his personal scandals, ignoring inquiries from the board, and skipping 7 consecutive quarterly meetings. She reiterated that she didn't need revenge. The facts spoke for themselves. The boardroom was so silent you could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Carter stood there, sweat dripping down his temples. He suddenly realized that none of the directors had spoken a single word in his defense. These men used to bow and call him Mr. Vance. Now, they were scrolling through Evelyn's dossier, their faces clearly saying he was finished. Carter clenched his fists, arguing that even if she were right, the shareholders hadn't voted yet, meaning he was still the CEO, and her calling this meeting was an overreach. Evelyn smiled. She clarified that it was an emergency board meeting, which she had the right to call. Furthermore, she held up a piece of paper displaying the signatures of over 2/3 of the sitting directors approving his immediate removal. She informed him that, as of this moment, he was no longer the CEO. Carter saw the signatures. Director Cole, Director Smith, Director Miller, men who had followed him for years. Carter looked at them. Director Cole avoided his gaze. Director Smith stared at his phone. Director Miller stood up, mumbled that he needed a smoke, and bumped Carter's shoulder as he walked out. Carter stood alone in the half-empty boardroom. Evelyn's image remained on the projector, quietly observing him like a stranger. He asked her when she started planning this. She replied that 3 years ago, when she was pregnant with Leo, he was abroad celebrating another woman's birthday. On her drive home from a prenatal appointment, she realized she hadn't married him to be a trophy. Since he treated her like nothing, she decided to strip away everything he valued most, piece by piece, taking her time. Evelyn closed her folder, offered a polite smile to the camera, and bid the remaining directors a good day. The video window went dark. Carter stood alone in the massive boardroom, the bright overhead lights pinning him to the spot. He hadn't brought his cell phone, so he picked up the conference room phone and dialed Thomas. When it connected, he ordered Thomas to immediately run a background check on all of Evelyn's assets and find out exactly how much of the Vance family wealth she controlled. Thomas stayed silent for a moment before admitting there was something else he hadn't told him. Before Evelyn left, she had made a deal with Thomas. She offered him 3 years' salary plus a house in exchange for his full cooperation over the last 3 months. She had been preparing this for 3 months. She had obtained all the evidence, all the files, and all the contacts well in advance. Everything Thomas had told Carter yesterday was scripted by Evelyn, including the DNA test, the mansion sale, and the frozen cards. Carter screamed, demanding to know what else it included. Thomas calmly replied that it included reporting Carter's primary phone SIM card as stolen 2 days ago. His current cell phone had absolutely no service. The messages Thomas had sent him were via a backup number Evelyn had provided. Carter looked down at his shattered phone. It had 0 bars. He finally understood that his every line of communication with the outside world had been systematically severed. The boardroom doors swung open. 2 HR representatives walked in carrying cardboard boxes. A young woman politely informed him that CEO Hayes had instructed them to have him pack up his personal belongings, as the office was scheduled for remodeling that afternoon. As Carter stood in the empty room, the desk phone rang again. He picked it up. A strange male voice asked for Mr. Carter Vance, identifying himself as a representative from the Visa and Financial Compliance Department of the Swiss Consulate in the U.S. He informed Carter that Evelyn Hayes had submitted an emergency petition with legal backing to freeze all international bank accounts under his name. Carter dropped the phone. Security guards escorted him out of the Vance Enterprises building. His personal belongings were shoved into a single cardboard box. It contained a fountain pen he had used for 3 years, 2 boxes of business cards, and a framed photo. The photo was of him, Richard, and Margaret, taken in the courtyard of their Beverly Hills estate. In the photo, Carter was smiling distractedly. Margaret stood beside him. Richard sat in front. Back then, the old man hadn't suffered his stroke and looked sharp. Carter had kept that photo on his desk for 3 years without ever truly looking at it. The security guard shoved the box into his chest and told him to leave quickly because clients were waiting in the lobby. Carter stood outside the corporate tower holding his box. Employees hurried past him, none stopping to ask if he was okay. People who once bowed to greet him now avoided him like the plague. He stood in the wind for 10 minutes before remembering his car was in the underground garage, but he had lost his keys in the chaos. He checked all his pockets. Nothing. He used a payphone to call Thomas's desk. A woman answered, informing him that Thomas had started his annual paid vacation. Carter demanded she put Thomas on the line. The woman paused, then said Thomas had explicitly instructed that if Mr. Vance called, It was not a convenient time to answer. She hung up. Left with no other option, Carter hailed a cab to his parents' Beverly Hills estate. The driver kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror but said nothing. Carter leaned against the window, his mind boiling like a pot of chaos. When he walked in, he called out for his mother. Margaret walked out of the kitchen, her hands covered in flour. Seeing his disheveled state, she showed no surprise, simply asking if he had eaten. Carter set his box on the coffee table and demanded to know why she gave the shares to Evelyn. Margaret wiped her hands and stated that at 63 years old, she saw things clearly. She swore that if the child in Chloe's belly was truly Carter's, she would cut her own head off and let him kick it like a soccer ball. Carter froze, asking what she meant. Margaret sneered, asking if he thought she and his stroke-ridden father were senile. The Vance family line was crucial. She had investigated Chloe. The pregnancy timeline didn't add up, and Chloe's words were 90% lies. Carter's head was buzzing. He asked why she still gave Evelyn the shares. Margaret explained that since Richard's stroke, Carter had taken over. He knew exactly what he had done. 3 years of massive losses. If she let him continue, the Vance legacy would be destroyed. Evelyn had brains and skill. Giving her the shares meant saving the company. Giving them to Carter just meant throwing them into his mistress's black hole. Carter stood up, arguing that Evelyn was his wife, but she took the company and filed for divorce, meaning the Vance family lost everything anyway. Margaret looked at him for a few seconds and laughed bitterly. She pointed out that he was still calling her his wife. When he left her alone for her prenatal checkups, did he call her his wife? When he put Chloe in the passenger seat of his car, did he call Evelyn his wife? When he refused to come home for Thanksgiving, forcing Evelyn to bring Leo to the estate alone, did he call her his wife? Carter was rendered speechless. Margaret took off her apron, threw it on the sofa, and sat down. Her voice turned calm. She told him honestly that Evelyn had been genuinely good to her. When Richard was hospitalized for 6 months while Carter was out with Chloe, Evelyn was the one at the hospital every day, handling all the dirty work of caring for him without a single complaint. She asked Carter to look in the mirror and ask himself what he had ever done for Evelyn. Carter couldn't find a single word to say. Margaret continued, revealing that before leaving, Evelyn had asked for the shares. Evelyn said she wanted to use the Vance brand to accomplish certain things. She promised not to mistreat the Vance family and guaranteed their dividend payouts would not be short a single cent. Evelyn had also told Margaret one other thing she originally hadn't planned to share with Carter. Carter looked into his mother's eyes and asked what it was. Margaret revealed that Evelyn said the child in Chloe's belly was part of a scam enacted by an actress she hired to fool him. Carter stood paralyzed, as if struck by lightning. He asked what she meant. Margaret confirmed he hadn't misheard. Chloe was arranged by his assistant, Thomas. Thomas worked for Evelyn. She had planted that trap next to him 3 years ago, waiting for him to fall in completely before pulling the net to take back everything that belonged to him. Carter collapsed onto the sofa, his face ashen. So, for 3 years, all the sweet nothings he whispered to Chloe, every time he wired money for a house, a car, or a designer bag, every time he turned his phone off to attend a fake checkup, it was all under Evelyn's surveillance. She had watched him step into the grave, casually shoveled dirt over his head, and waited for him to hit the bottom before burying him completely. Carter suddenly realized something else. He turned to Margaret and asked who Leo's real father was. Margaret stayed silent for a long time before saying she had tried to investigate, but Evelyn had used her mother's old connections to scrub the records clean. Whatever Evelyn wanted hidden, no one could dig up. But Margaret told him one thing. That boy called her grandma with far more sincerity than he ever called Carter dad. Carter buried his face in his hands, hunching over. His mother's words cut too deep, because they were true. Whenever Leo called him dad, his voice was small and timid, as if afraid of him. Yet Carter had never attended a single parent-teacher conference. Once, Evelyn called him while he was dining with Chloe, asking if he would come to Leo's school play. He said he was busy. Later, he saw a video on Evelyn's Instagram story. Leo was dressed as a little lion on stage. Every other child had parents in the audience, but next to Leo's empty row, Evelyn sat alone, recording the video and clapping loudly in the empty auditorium. Carter had just liked the post and kept scrolling. He hadn't known that night, Evelyn took Leo to get his favorite ice cream, and when Leo asked why Dad didn't come, she promised he would come when he wasn't busy. But now Carter understood she wasn't waiting for him to be free. She was waiting to be free of him. Carter looked up, his eyes terrifyingly bloodshot. He begged his mother to tell him where Evelyn was and for a way to contact her. Margaret stood up and walked toward the kitchen, tossing over her shoulder that Evelyn had blocked all his contacts and discarded her old number. Before leaving, Evelyn had told Margaret that once she settled things in Zurich, she would return on her own, and it would be up to Carter to see if he even had the right to stand in front of her then. Carter asked when she was coming back. Margaret paused at the kitchen door, looked back, and told him to take a wild guess before shutting the door. Carter sat alone in the massive living room. The California sun streamed through the windows, but he felt freezing. He pulled out his shattered phone, managed to get it to turn on, and saw the voice note Chloe had sent the night before. He pressed play again and again. Finally, he called her number. Chloe answered, still using her sweet, whiny voice. She complained about how much she missed him and asked why he hadn't replied. Carter gripped the phone until his knuckles turned white. He demanded to know what her relationship with Thomas was. The line went dead silent for 5 seconds. When Chloe spoke again, the sweet act was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp tone. She mocked him, saying he finally figured it out. She admitted Thomas was her fiancé, and they were registering their marriage next month. She passed along Thomas's thanks for the generous year-end bonuses over the years, which were enough to pay the down payment on their new house. Carter's face went dark. Chloe continued, dropping another bomb. She was never pregnant, and she had never slept with him. She was disgusted by his cologne. Evelyn had paid her a handsome sum to play a role, and she took the easy money. Carter's voice shook. He asked if she had just lied to him from the start. Chloe laughed cheerfully, mocking him for thinking she would actually fall for a cold-blooded reptile like him. She revealed that Evelyn had been preparing this for 3 years. From the very first night he stayed over at Chloe's and didn't go home, Evelyn started gathering evidence. Every bank transfer, every hotel booking, every gift receipt, Evelyn had it all. She told him to go check the trending pages and hung up. Carter tried calling back, but the number was disconnected. He sat frozen for 10 minutes before springing up, sprinting out of the estate, and hailing a cab to Chloe's apartment. When he arrived, the door was ajar, the closets were empty, and all the cosmetics were gone. On the coffee table lay an envelope addressed to him. Inside was a debit card and a note. "This is the total amount you spent on me over 3 years, $2 million. Evelyn told me to return it to you in full. She said she doesn't want your dirty money. Use it to buy yourself a coffin." Carter crouched in the empty living room, crushing the debit card in his fist. His phone screen suddenly lit up. It was a push notification from X, CEO of Vance Enterprises ousted. Hilarious love triangle. Explicit video of Carter Vance and Chloe Davis. Next to the hashtag was a red trending icon. Carter clicked it. The top video had over 8 million views. It showed a man and a woman entangled in a hotel room. The man's face was crystal clear it was him. The camera angle was perfectly positioned facing the bed, capturing every detail. The comments were updating rapidly. People recognized him, mocked him for cheating, and cheered for his wife taking the company and kicking him out. The top comment read, "Heard this scumbag used corporate funds to fund his affair." Vance stock dropped 9% today. Retail investors are cursing him out. He belongs in prison. Carter threw his phone against the wall, shattering it into pieces. He curled up in the corner of the empty apartment, shivering in the draft from the window. He was finished. Truly finished. Meanwhile, 8,000 miles away in Zurich, Evelyn closed the browser tab displaying the news of Carter's termination and took a sip of her coffee. The consultant with gold-rimmed glasses next to her asked if she had seen the trending topics back home. Evelyn set her cup down and noted that she provided the raw footage, so she knew what was out there. The consultant chuckled, saying he had pulled an all-nighter editing it. Evelyn thanked him for his hard work. She picked up her phone, checked the viral hashtags, and locked the screen. She looked out at the snowy peaks of the Swiss Alps, letting out a soft breath. She looked down at Leo, who was quietly drawing a picture, and told him they were flying back to the US the day after tomorrow. Leo looked up, asking if they were going to see Grandma. Evelyn patted his head, saying yes, and that they would also kick out the people who didn't belong in the Vance family positions. Leo hummed in agreement and went back to drawing a big house with a tall person, a short person, and a big cat. Evelyn smiled at the drawing. She texted Margaret, "Mom, I'm coming back the day after tomorrow. Please arrange a meeting with all the Vance family branch heads. I have some debts to settle with them in person." Margaret replied immediately, "Understood." Evelyn locked her phone. The snow on the mountains outside was bathed in golden sunset light. On the desk in front of her lay a map of the corporate equity distribution among the Vance family branches, with percentages listed next to names. She uncapped a red pen and circled several names. These were the relatives who had leached off the company while Carter was in charge, setting up shell companies to embezzle funds. She had stacks of evidence proving they took kickbacks. Evelyn capped the pen and closed the folder. She looked out the window and whispered to herself, "Carter, did you think this was the end? This is only the beginning." Carter sat in Chloe's empty apartment all night. When dawn broke, he finally stood up, his knees so stiff he could barely bend them. He leaned against the wall and limped out. The security guard downstairs was startled by his appearance and asked if he needed an ambulance. Carter waved him off and stumbled to the sidewalk. He pulled out his wallet to hail a cab and realized he only had some crumpled bills left. He counted it, $32. His black card was gone, the supplementary card maxed, his bank accounts frozen. All the liquid cash he had in the world was $32. Standing on the street at 6:00 a.m., the cold wind made him shiver. He suddenly burst into a bitter, agonizing laugh, feeling as if he were chewing on broken glass. He hailed a cab and gave the driver his parents' address. He sat in silence, looking out the window. As they drove over a highway overpass, he saw a massive billboard advertising Vance Enterprises' upcoming product launch. The brand ambassador was a rising star he had personally signed. But printed boldly across the ad were the words, "Chief Executive Officer of Vance Enterprises, Evelyn Hayes, leading the new era of glory." Carter stared at that name for 3 seconds. Her name was plastered on his company's billboard. Below it was a photo of her in a sharp black suit, hair pulled back, looking into the camera with zero expression. The photo was stunning, capturing even the small beauty mark on her forehead. Carter had walked past that face countless times, but he had never known she could look like this sharp, decisive, radiating the absolute certainty of someone in power. The cab driver glanced in the rearview mirror and announced they had arrived. Carter snapped out of his daze, paid the fare, and walked into the estate. Margaret was eating breakfast, a bowl of oatmeal and some fruit. She glanced at him and asked if he hadn't come home last night. Carter hummed, sat down, and asked about the company's status. Margaret picked up a strawberry and stated that Evelyn had issued a corporate memo that morning. A new CEO position was added to the headquarters, and she was filling it. Carter's old position was left vacant pending the results of a comprehensive audit. Carter asked what they were auditing. Margaret put her fork down and stared at him. She listed the invoices he signed, the project funds he approved, and the house he bought for that woman using company money. Every single financial transaction during his tenure was under audit. She informed him that the independent audit firm Evelyn hired was ruthless. She had been sharpening this knife for 3 years. Did he really think they wouldn't find anything? Carter's vision blurred. He asked for the preliminary estimate. Margaret said the initial required restitution was around $5 million. Including fines and corporate damages, his personal liability was creeping toward $10 million. Carter dropped his hands onto the table. He argued that every expense had project invoices and matching ledgers. Margaret cut him off, pointing out that half of those projects were shell contracts. He signed the paperwork one day, and the funds went into Chloe's account the next. The auditors had tracked every cent. Every signature was his own handwriting. He couldn't escape this debt. Carter's face went from pale to gray. He remembered his years in power, hastily signing whatever documents Thomas put in front of him without ever checking the ledgers, assuming his authority made him untouchable. Now, every signature was a nail in his coffin. The estate's landline rang. Margaret answered and handed the receiver to Carter, saying it was for him. A stiff, professional male voice asked to confirm he was Carter Vance, identifying himself as a representative of the Vance Enterprises audit team. He demanded Carter submit a personal asset declaration within 7 business days to comply with the post-termination audit. Carter demanded to know who authorized him to audit his books. The voice remained emotionless, citing Section 146 of Corporate Law and Article 37 of the company bylaws, confirming the controlling shareholder had initiated a full forensic audit. He advised Carter to cooperate to avoid immediate legal prosecution. Carter slammed the phone down. Margaret watched him and told him not to take his anger out on the phone. She reminded him he did this to himself by spending all that money on Chloe. Carter slumped in his chair, silent for a long time. Finally, he looked up and said he wanted to see Evelyn. Margaret told him she was returning the day after tomorrow and he could contact her himself, but warned him not to expect any mercy. She had spent 3 years setting this trap. She wouldn't stop just because he begged. Carter didn't reply. He stood up and walked out. Margaret called after him, asking where he was going. He said he was finding a lawyer. Carter took a bus to a law firm in Century City. The managing partner, attorney Peterson, was an old college buddy he used to drink with. The receptionist recognized Carter but looked uncomfortable, asking him to wait. Carter sat in the lobby for an hour before Peterson finally walked in, wearing a tight, professional smile. Carter cut to the chase, asking Peterson to represent him in a divorce suit and an equity dispute. Peterson leaned forward, maintaining his smile, and warned Carter that his wife had contacted their firm yesterday. She provided an airtight chain of evidence proving his gross marital misconduct, including infidelity, dissipating marital assets, and emotional neglect. She was demanding he walk away with absolutely nothing. Carter angrily refused, claiming the company belonged to his family and she had no right to it. Peterson slid a manila folder across the table. It contained the notarized share transfer agreement signed by Margaret Vance, including an addendum stating the transfer was zero-cost compensation for Evelyn's 3 years of dedication to the family. It was legally bulletproof. Peterson sighed, dropping the professional act. He told Carter as a friend that Evelyn's evidence was flawless, from hospital records from 3 years ago to hotel security footage. No lawyer could win this case for him. Carter protested that he provided for her for 3 years, and every cent she spent was his. Peterson cut him off, revealing that Evelyn's personal investments had yielded massive returns over the last 3 years. Furthermore, the $50,000 monthly allowance Carter transferred to her had been deposited into a separate account. She had never touched a single cent. Carter was stunned. Peterson handed him a bank statement showing the $1.8 million balance intact. Then he revealed that yesterday, Evelyn had donated the entire $1.8 million to a children's charity in Carter's name. Peterson added one last detail. Evelyn had authorized the firm to handle the restitution of the $2 million Carter spent on Chloe. Chloe had wired the funds back to Carter's frozen account yesterday. Carter stood outside the law firm, the autumn wind messing up his hair. 3 days ago, he was a billionaire CEO with thousands of employees, living in a $15 million mansion. Today, he had $32 to his name. He took a bus to Thomas's neighborhood. He needed to know how much Evelyn paid him to play this 3-year game. He knocked on the door. Thomas opened it, wearing loungewear. Inside, Chloe was sitting on the couch, surrounded by wedding invitations. Chloe smiled brightly, welcoming him to their wedding planning session. Carter glared at Thomas, demanding to know what his relationship with Chloe was. Thomas let him in, explaining they had been together for 5 years. 3 years ago, when Carter wanted a companion, Thomas introduced Chloe. Chloe's only condition was that she would act, but never do anything real. Thomas reminded Carter that he had never even touched a hair on her head, as she always used pregnancy symptoms to avoid him. Carter's face drained of color. He remembered all those nights Chloe pushed him away, claiming the baby was kicking. He had thought it was normal. Thomas chuckled, mocking Carter for being so easily fooled. Evelyn had figured out Carter's arrogant, unquestioning nature years ago. She just gave him the illusion he wanted so he would dig his own grave. Carter lunged, grabbing Thomas by the collar and slamming him into the wall. Thomas didn't fight back. He just smiled and invited Carter to hit him, reminding him that an assault charge would land him in jail for at least a week. Carter's fist trembled in the air. Chloe stood up, telling Carter to wake up. She relayed a message from Evelyn. His biggest flaw was believing he was never wrong. He blamed Evelyn for selling the house and taking the money, but if he had just come home for dinner or looked at Leo just once, he wouldn't be in this situation. Carter released Thomas and slid down the hallway wall, burying his face in his knees, his shoulders shaking. Thomas sighed, delivering Evelyn's final message. Carter had spent 3 years stringing his mistress along while Evelyn waited at home for 4 years. She was done waiting, and now it was his turn to taste what it felt like to be abandoned. Thomas closed the door. Carter sat alone in the hallway. He pulled out his phone, navigating the cracked screen. Push notifications flooded in, all featuring his name, airing out all the dirty laundry he thought he had hidden. He slowly stood up and limped down the stairs. He didn't know where to go. His mother looked at him with disappointment. He couldn't even get past the security desk at his company. He had hundreds of contacts in his phone, but no one he could call in a crisis. He walked out of the complex and stood on the street. Through the window of a convenience store, a small TV was broadcasting the local news. The anchor announced that the former CEO of Vance Enterprises had been ousted for severe misconduct and his assets frozen. Carter saw his own face on the screen, accompanied by the Chiron, billionaire scion's spectacular fall from grace. He remembered Evelyn's diary entry. "I waited 3 years for you to turn around. When he finally did, she was already gone." Carter sat on the curb, smoking half a pack of cigarettes. He didn't remember when he started smoking again. His phone died. He spent the night wandering aimlessly, eventually ending up on a pedestrian overpass, watching the taillights of the cars below. He stood there for 20 minutes before finally walking down. He took a night bus back to the Beverly Hills estate. Margaret had left the door unlocked and a dim lamp on in the living room. Carter quietly went upstairs, fell onto his bed in the dark, and lay motionless. The next morning, voices downstairs woke him. He walked down to find Margaret, Richard in his wheelchair, and his uncle Robert Vance, who managed his own offshoot businesses. Robert looked at Carter and demanded to know what was going on. Margaret explained that Evelyn was returning the next day to assume full control, and she planned to purge the old executive board and dissolve all the shell companies the relatives had been using to siphon money from Vance Enterprises. Robert slammed his hand on the table, arguing those companies were independent. Margaret calmly fired back, pointing out that those companies survived entirely by leeching off Vance Enterprises' supply chain. Evelyn had all the evidence and offered 2 choices: dissolve voluntarily and return the embezzled profits, or face the forensic auditors and criminal charges. Robert was furious, yelling that Evelyn was an outsider with no right to touch the Vance legacy. Margaret stared him down, stating that Evelyn was the controlling shareholder and had the evidence to ruin them all. She reminded Robert of the illicit steel shipments he ran last year, shutting him up instantly. Carter watched this exchange, feeling incredibly detached. These relatives who used to bow to him were only bowing to the CEO title. Now that he was stripped of it, he was just a useless outcast to them. Robert demanded 2 days to think it over. Margaret refused, telling him he needed to answer before Evelyn returned. Robert stormed out. Richard mumbled something from his wheelchair. Margaret leaned in to listen, then looked at Carter. She relayed his father's message. He hadn't expected Carter to destroy the family empire so quickly. It felt like a punch to the chest. Carter left the house, walking for an hour until he reached a park. He sat on a bench, watching ducks in a pond. He remembered Evelyn asking him to take Leo to the park 3 years ago. He had brushed her off. She later posted a photo of Leo watching ducks, and Richard had commented on how much Leo looked like Carter as a kid. Carter couldn't even remember if this was the same park. When he returned to the estate at sunset, a black Mercedes was parked in the driveway. A man in a gray suit with gold-rimmed glasses stepped out. It was Attorney Evans, Evelyn's legal counsel. He handed Carter a document, the official divorce agreement. It stipulated that Carter would walk away with absolutely nothing. If he refused, she would sue for a fault-based divorce. Carter demanded custody of Leo. Attorney Evans shut him down, reminding him that the notarized DNA test proved he had 0 biological or legal claim to the child. Evans relayed a message from Evelyn. She gave him 3 years. He wasted them, and now she expected an answer by the time she landed the next day. Carter took the papers to his study. He pulled out the diaries, rereading the line about her waiting for 3 years. Tears streamed down his face. He finally understood. He signed the divorce papers, sealing his own fate. The next day, Margaret informed him Evelyn's flight was landing at 3:00 p.m. Carter drove to LAX. He stood in the arrivals hall, scanning the crowd. Finally, he saw her. Evelyn, wearing a cream trench coat, holding Leo's hand. Next to her was a tall man carrying a child's suitcase. Carter recognized him instantly. Julian Brooks, a college senior who had always been close to Evelyn's family. Julian had toasted them at their wedding and vanished, but now he was here, looking like part of a family with Evelyn and Leo. Carter shoved through the crowd and blocked their path. Evelyn didn't even flinch. She told Julian to take Leo to get some ice cream. Julian gave Carter a dismissive look that clearly said he had no right to be there and walked away with the boy. Carter demanded to know what she wanted, accusing her of taking his company, his house, and his shares. Evelyn offered a cold, polite smile. She reminded him that his father built the company, and Carter had simply run it into the ground, losing 40% of their profits. She clarified that she sold her own house, his mother gifted her the shares voluntarily, and she had donated all the alimony he sent her to charity. Even the money he spent on Chloe had been returned. She owed him nothing. Carter gritted his teeth, asking about Leo. He argued that he raised the boy for 4 years. Evelyn cut him off, reminding him of the DNA test. She asked him to search his conscience. How many meals had he fed Leo? How many baths had he given him? How many bedtime stories had he read? Carter's face burned red. Evelyn's voice softened slightly, but remained firm. She told him to remember how she felt sitting alone at the dinner table hundreds of times while he was out with his mistress. Carter's voice broke as he begged to know who Leo's real father was. Evelyn looked him in the eye and revealed the truth. She said Leo was the child of an anonymous sperm donor. On the night Carter was at a hotel with Chloe, Evelyn had spiked a 102-degree fever and ended up in the ER. While getting an IV drip, she signed the paperwork to begin IVF. She chose not to have Carter's child. Carter was stunned. He asked why she didn't tell him. Evelyn asked how he would have reacted while he was obsessed with Chloe. He knew she was right. He would have forced her to terminate the pregnancy. She stated that Leo deserved a normal family, and Carter didn't even know the boy's birthday. Carter grabbed her wrist, begging for one last chance, promising to change. Evelyn looked at his hand, amused. She asked how he planned to change when he didn't even know what she liked to eat. Carter desperately claimed she liked sweets. Evelyn laughed, pointing out that Chloe liked sweets. She hated them. She gently but firmly removed his hand from her wrist. She told him he misunderstood 3 things. She wasn't waiting for him to change. She was waiting to gather the strength to leave. Leo was not his son, and their marriage died the first night he stayed at Chloe's. She just took 3 years to plan the funeral. Carter broke down in tears in the middle of the airport. He told her he had cried for 3 days, while she cried for 3 years. He begged for a chance to make up for it. Evelyn looked at him and asked if he knew which day was the hardest for her. It was the day she went into labor at 3:00 a.m., drove herself to the hospital, and endured 5 hours of agonizing contractions while he ignored 5 phone calls because he was cutting Chloe's birthday cake. Carter collapsed to his knees. He whispered, "I'm sorry." Evelyn told him those words were 3 years too late, turned around, and walked toward Julian and Leo. Carter watched them walk away. Leo looked back and called out, "Dad!" Evelyn gently turned the boy's head forward, telling him not to look back. Carter remained on his knees on the marble floor, shattered. He eventually drove back to the estate. Margaret showed him a viral video. Chloe had posted a public apology. The internet relentlessly mocked Carter as a fool who got played by his own wife's brilliant scheme. Margaret told him his uncle Robert and the rest of the family had immediately folded, agreeing to Evelyn's terms to save themselves, completely abandoning Carter. Carter went up to his study, read the diaries one last time, and made a decision. He had to start over. He applied for jobs and eventually landed a low-paying position as a logistics dispatcher. 3 months later, the Vance Enterprises headquarters had been fully remodeled. Evelyn hosted a massive product launch and quarterly report event in the plaza outside the building. Carter stood at the edge of the crowd, wearing a simple gray sweater, looking thinner, but much more grounded. Evelyn gave a flawless presentation. During the Q&A, Uncle Robert suddenly stood up and accused her of ruining the supply chain. Evelyn calmly projected irrefutable evidence of Robert's embezzlement onto the massive screen. Robert, humiliated and desperate, pulled a pocket knife and charged the stage, screaming that he would kill her. Carter sprinted from the back of the crowd, tackling his uncle to the ground and shielding Evelyn. In the struggle, the knife slashed deeply across the back of Carter's hand. Security dragged Robert away. Evelyn looked at Carter, breathing heavily, and thanked him. Carter managed a weak smile, saying it was the first time in his life he had ever protected someone. Evelyn bandaged his bleeding hand herself. Carter asked her not to send him away. She paused, then told him he could stay if he wanted. After the event, the crowd dispersed. Carter was about to leave when Evelyn walked up to him and handed him an envelope. Inside was a check for $10 million. She told him she had cleared his restitution debt with the auditors, using the money recovered from his uncle. She said he could pay her back slowly. Carter looked at the check, smiling bitterly, saying it might take him a lifetime to pay it off. Evelyn looked away and said, "Then take your time." She turned to leave, then paused and mentioned that Leo was in the green room playing with Julian. She asked if he wanted to see him. Carter's eyes widened, fighting back tears, and he nodded. In the green room, Leo ran up and hugged Carter's leg, calling him Dad. Carter dropped to his knees, hugging the boy tightly. Leo showed him a drawing of a big house with 3 people: a tall man, a woman in a red suit, and a little boy. Written in crayon was, Mom, Dad, and Leo. Carter carefully folded the drawing and put it in his breast pocket. He promised to visit every weekend and take Leo to see the ducks at the park. Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, watching them. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were softer. Julian asked her if she was sure about this. She simply replied, "No rush." Carter walked out of the green room holding Leo's hand. He looked back at Evelyn, asking if she would really let him visit every weekend. She told him it depended on her mood, but reminded him to frame the drawing and not wrinkle it. Carter smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile, and agreed. As Carter and Leo walked out into the California sunshine, Leo asked if he was going to leave again. Carter hooked his pinky around Leo's and promised he wasn't going anywhere. He would stay right here and earn his way back to him and his mom. Up in the executive suite, Evelyn stood by the window. Watching the man and the boy walk toward an ice cream shop, Julian stood beside her. She pulled the blinds shut, took out her phone, and sent Carter a text. "What time are you coming tomorrow?" Down on the street, Carter felt his phone buzz. He read the message, his smile widening. He typed back, 9:00 a.m. "I'll take Leo to get those French croissants he loves." Evelyn replied with a single word. "Yes." Carter looked at that yes, put his phone in his pocket, and opened the door to the ice cream shop. The door swung shut behind them, blocking out the past and opening up to a brand new beginning.